So here comes to part 7 of relative clause. In the previous video, we've already talked about relative pronouns, who, whom, which, that, and whose. And finally, it comes to the last part that we talk about relative adverbs, when, where, and why. What is relative adverb? When relative pronouns can replace a noun or pronoun in a sentence to form a relative clause, what do relative adverbs replace? Of course, relative adverb is to replace adverb. If you still remember the adverb taught in grade 7, then you know that we'll talk about adverbs of time, adverbs of place, and adverbs of reason. And if we want to use a double-H word to talk about time, that would be when. If we want to use a double-H word to talk about place, that would be where. And if we want to use a double-H word to talk about reason, that would be why. And so if we want to replace adverbs of time, place, and reason, we'll use the relative adverb when, where, and why. Before we talk about the relative adverbs, let's take a look at the adverbial clause in a normal sentence first. For example, in this one, we met on this day. So we know we is the subject, met is the verb, and so on this day is actually the adverbial clause to talk about time. And then in this sentence, they went to the church. They is the subject, went is the verb, and to the church is actually the adverbial clause to talk about the place. And then in this sentence, I sing because I'm happy. I is the subject, sing is the verb, and because I'm happy is the adverbial clause to talk about reason. And so, if we want to replace these adverbial clause to form a relative clause, then we'll use the double-H word where, when, and why to replace them and form relative clause. So take a look at these two sentences. The picture was taken in the park. I used to play in the park. So let's set one sentence as the main clause and then the other one to make it into a relative clause. And then we'll use the double-H word to replace the adverbial clause. So let's set the first one as the main clause. The picture was taken in the park. And now we want to use the relative clause to give extra information about the park. And so the second sentence, in the park, will be replaced by where. And so we'll combine these two sentences like this. The picture was taken in the park, where I used to play. So the where I used to play is a relative clause, and we put it right after in the park because we want to give extra information about the park. So as long as we use a double-H word or relative adverb to replace an adverbial clause, then this is how we form the relative clause. It's just like the normal way we do it as I have introduced in my previous videos. And because this adverbial clause is about place, so we use the relative adverb where to replace it. So let's take a look at this example. I remember the day. We met on the day. And let's assume I remember the day as the main clause. That's the main message. I want to tell you I remember the day. And we want to give extra information about the day, so we make the second sentence as a relative clause. And you can see that in the second sentence, we met on the day. On the day is an adverbial clause to talk about time. And so we use the double-H word when to replace this adverbial clause and then make this sentence into a relative clause like this. I remember the day when we first met. So this is how we make a relative clause with the relative adverb when. So when is used to replace the adverbial clause to talk about time. So the last example that I want to use here is this. Tell me the reason is the main clause. You came here late for a reason is the relative clause because we want to give an extra information about the reason. And you know that for a reason is the adverbial clause for reason. So we'll use the double-H word why to replace these adverbial clause. So it will be combined like this. Tell me the reason why you came home late. We're giving extra information about the reason. What reason? Oh, the reason why you came home late. So we use why, this double-H word, to replace adverbial clause of reason. So I'm not going to go into detail how to form relative clause or where to put this relative adverb or pronoun. You can go back to my previous video. But to conclude, if we want to replace an adverbial clause to combine and form a relative clause, we use relative adverbs when, where, and why to talk about place, time, and reason. So this is the last part, introducing relative clause. Right now, you should have learned how to identify a relative clause, how to form a relative clause, how to use all these relative pronouns and relative adverbs. You've learned about defining and non-defining relative clause, subject relative pronoun, object relative pronouns. So I hope that with all these terms, you should be able to write better using relative clause in an essay. And also, if you can naturally write with relative clauses, maybe you want to use the skills that you have learned in these videos to help you proofread your writing, to make sure you use relative clauses correctly in your writing. So thank you for watching.